Record. Okay, guys, so welcome again this afternoon for the final Zoom of the second module about media education. Today we have with us Professor Tayie. Um, sorry, yes. She's graduated in journalism and communication from the American University of Cairo, and she holds a doctorate, a PhD in journalism and communication from the Autonomous University of Barcelona. She was the coordinator of this same master, and she is a researcher specialized in journalism, media and informational literacy, disinformation, AI applied to journalism, and many more. And she's also a university professor at the Arab Academy of Science, Technology, and Maritime Transport in Cairo. So thank you, Sally, for your time today, and welcome to this session.
Thank you very much, Albert. It's always a pleasure to be with the Gabinete in any project, honestly. And always a pleasure to meet the Masters of Communication Education students. So as Albert kindly introduced me, I would like to get to know you a little bit more. So maybe a quick round of introductions would be a good idea. Like, what's your background? Maybe a very brief line about what you know about media and information literacy, and then we can take it from there. So maybe start with, I'll go with the order of the screen. So I have Georgie first.
Sure. Sorry, I cannot turn on my video, but I hope it's okay. Yeah, my background is mainly consists of media. I used to study media in undergrad and then my first master degree. And I worked in many media outlets, including some international ones. And now I'm doing also my PhD at the UAB. So I'm doing two programs, and I'm researching how kids interact with media and how they transmit their findings with parents in terms of like gender and different sexual roles. So I would say I have a very extensive experience in media, but it was a pleasure for me to read other sources as well during this module. So it was actually a great finding for me.
That's great. Thank you very much, Georgie. Brahmana, excuse me if I'm mispronouncing any name, and please feel free to correct me.
Hi, my name is Neni Brahma, and I finished my bachelor actually in field art and films. And then after I had a chance to be a teacher in Germany, and therefore I was thinking I'm looking for something more like intertwined between the media and education field, something like that. So yeah, I was looking forward for this master.
That's amazing. Thank you very much. Stephen?
Hi, Sally. Sally, my name is Stephen. I am currently in Vancouver, Canada. I have studied bachelor at my undergrad. I've studied philosophy as as a discipline. Both I was born and raised in India, so I predominantly, have a lot of my history and background and like the time that I've spent in India. For the last half decade, I've been in Canada. And at this point, I mean, after my bachelor's, I studied management, marketing management. I worked for a university on the business development side. And the idea of taking this degree program was to deepen my understanding on communication and education, and to take it forward as to complement my journey in the education space. I've been in the working with universities for over a decade now. But that's a little about me.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Liu?
Hello, Sunny. I'm Nini, and I'm from Guangzhou, China. And my bachelor degree is about English teaching. But after my graduate, having do some work about education it is about business and trading. The reason why I want to study education, the first reason is about I have 2 children, so I want to through the learning to know how to educate. And the second part is about I want in my future life I have a chance to change my career to education. And as to the module 2, I have read books. In my opinion, I think the media literacy is about we can get a lot of information in the society, but we don't know how to distinct which is correct, which is wrong, and so it is very important for us to improve our critical thinking. That is my point. Okay.
Very much. It's a pleasure to be with you guys, and I think we have a very nice diversity of backgrounds here. However, I see how far this is relevant to you, and I really hope that today's lecture add to your knowledge a little bit or meet your expectations. So let me begin by sharing my screen. And I'll wait for your confirmation that you can see it correctly. Can you guys see my screen? Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, we see it.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ah, so it started to begin from, let's see, just a moment. There. Okay, so this is going to be the focus of today's session. It's going to be focused on media information literacy and AI literacy against the current challenges, algorithms, and our media experience, right? So this is a very brief outline of what we're going to be talking about. We're going to begin by a global overview, just to understand that, yes, we're talking about media, and the majority of the population on Earth is connected. However, there is still part of the world's population that is still not connected. We're going to talk about the current media environment, the challenges and risks, and we're going to zoom in a little bit on our digital media experience. We're going to divide this into different questions that invite all of us to reflect on how we deal with the media every day, whether it's applied to us personally or to those around us. And we're going to talk about how media and information literacy, algorithmic literacy, and AI literacy can be used to address the current challenges. We're going to end by reflecting a little bit on good practices and recommendations. So this is according to the most recent digital report that features how the world is connected. These are the statistics. As you can see, we have 63.9% of the population are social media users. We have 67.9% using the internet. We have 70.5% who are mobile subscribers. So if you compare these percentages to the past years, you'd see that they're increasing every year, which emphasizes the importance of addressing whatever challenges are existent in the digital media landscape. So I always like to begin with this reflecting a little bit on how the current media environment looks like, right? So in front of you, you are seeing bullet points. Each point reflects a different factor that can easily describe our current media environment. And you can all see that each of them is pretty much double-edged. Like, excuse me. Like, for instance, if we begin by innumerable information sources. So in the very old days, we used to all depend on the professional journalism for information, right? And the sources were pretty much counted on hands, right? Like you can tell we have in one country 4, 5, 7, 10 sources maximum, right? With some of them that are that people depend on most. However, nowadays, as we advance in technology, as we advance in the digital media landscape, we have innumerable information sources. This means that the information sources are no longer only journalists, are no longer only official organizations. However, we as users have become information sources to each other as well. Why is this double-edged? It's double-edged because on one side, it provides diversity, it provides richness, it provides freedom of expression. Perhaps users have more freedom to share information than the mainstream media, which is most of the time governed by certain agendas. However, on the downside, many of the shared information are not verified, right? And many of the users have the intention to mislead and misguide, as we're going to reflect in a while. So this is the first factor. The current media environment also is characterized by the fact that content creators are no longer only journalists. Content creators are journalists, are users, and sometimes they are trolls or bots, and we're gonna reflect on that a little bit. By bots here, we mean like automated accounts that are not necessarily human, right? We have rapid evolution of technology, right? Especially nowadays with the buzz around artificial intelligence and its different uses in the media. We have shifted from a traditional model of human gatekeepers to algorithmic gatekeepers. What does this mean? Can you guys tell me what you understand from this statement? What does it mean that we've turned from human gatekeepers to algorithmic gatekeepers?
I can try. Sally,
Yeah, sure.
like, so with regards to like, previously the way the media would operate, they would tend to have specialized people who would basically be trained enough to ensure the quality and content and everything that is, disseminated is sort of done appropriately. But whereas like with the advent of AI, a lot of this is actually now, is now very much driven by it, which leads to, sort of problems with misinformation, just sort of that data is sort of, accurate and not necessarily, misleading in any way. Is that something that I'm thinking
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. Absolutely. You're following a very important thread there, Stephen. It's very true that traditionally, well, if I have a newspaper or a TV channel, I have the editor, right? The person who is in charge
Yeah,
of deciding or have the final say of what passes to the audience and what not, right? And then how the news is going to be organized, how the information is going to be programmed, and so on. So this was the very traditional model of the human gatekeeping, right?
right.
Nowadays, with the digital media environment, which is the majority of the platforms we use, are characterized by depending on automated algorithms, right? These automated algorithms are programmed to make our experience as much personalized as possible, right? So we have this hyper personalized media environment where each of us have their own model or their own version of the information ecosystem, right? So to take an example to simplify this, if I compare my Facebook account to Steven's Facebook account, we definitely have very different content, right? So accordingly, if I count on this platform for information, my information ecosystem would be very different from Steven's information ecosystem. And this normally happens because there are algorithms that are fed our data, right? What we like, what we don't like, what we prefer, what we're interested in order to make our experience as much personalized as possible. And hence, in order to do this, they filter out information and let in information that will only keep us engaged for the longest period of time using these platforms, right? As we go, we're going to reflect on this concept more and more. And of course, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask, right? So this is a very important factor or very important characteristic that shapes today's media environment. And this, unfortunately, over the past years, studies have shown that there has been declining trust in professional journalism, and that many people, especially younger generations, prefer to seek sources, their peers or their friends or their social networks as sources of information. So, of course, this is a very serious issue, right? If you take a look here to this a bit chaotic slide? What do you see? Like different pictures that show us what we have in our media ecosystem or our information ecosystem, right? So I think 2020 with the COVID-19 has been a very important point in time where many international organizations have referred to what's happening, not just as a pandemic, but also as what is known as an infodemic. I don't know if you've heard this term before. This was coined, or this emerged as a result of the tons and tons of misinformation and fake news that surrounded the COVID-19, that surrounded the vaccines. We have heard and seen a lot of conspiracy theories, a lot of misinformation, and so on, right? You can also see in the picture something that's called echo chamber. Have you guys heard this term before? What's an echo chamber, or what this refers to? Yeah. So an echo chamber is basically hearing my voice, hearing same ideas over and over again. So being confined to a very limited number of voices rather than being exposed to a large diversity of voices, right? We also see a lot of harmful media content, right, intertwined in our information ecosystem. We see a lot of hate speech, right? And if we're not aware about it, it's very easy to get impacted, for our attitudes, our opinions regarding different people to be affected because of hate speech. We see stereotypes, we see violent content, and so on and so forth. Right? We also have a media environment that's constantly and quickly changing, right? Like by the day, you see a lot of technological advancements, you see a lot of advancements, again, specifically in the field of AI and its different applications, and absolutely the media environment is not away from that, right? So let me take you through an interesting timeline, a timeline of events that actually reflect how such harmful content or how such factors can have a real life impact. So the year 2016, according to many scholars, have been a turning point in considering how the information and media ecosystem works and what kind of impact the different components of this ecosystem can have on real life. Because in this year, two major events hit the world by surprise. So the first of which was Trump winning the presidential election for the first time, of course, and Brexit, right? The fact that a referendum took place and Britain has actually exited the European Union, right? Alongside other political campaigns in Latin America and Colombia and so on. There has been very similar symptoms in all these different events, right? We have heard that during the time, and different documentaries have shown that during that time, it was a very fertile environment for misinformation and disinformation, different campaigns that were used to mislead or to kind of affect people's opinion regarding different matters. So for instance, during that year, the Cambridge Analytica scandal was revealed. I don't know, have you guys heard about it? What happened? Can you tell me what you know about it?
That it's collected data without permissions, and based on this data, they let's say change the like feeds or how people let's say how they perceive the world picture based on this data that they also shared, how they like talk with each other, how they talked online. So it's basically like a huge data breach, if I can say so.
Yes, exactly. Thank you very much, Georgie. What happened was that Facebook sold a large amount of data, right, to Cambridge Analytica, which was a company that was biased to Trump one way or another, right? And started using the data. And this emphasizes what we were talking about a while ago regarding the filter bubbles, the echo chambers, and the algorithmic gatekeeping, right? Because they started using people's data in order to try to manipulate their opinions, right? So let's say if I know you very well, I probably know what you're interested in, what you prefer, what your fears are, what your dreams are, what you aspire for. So I can easily use the data I know about you to try to convince you with whatever argument I have, right? And this was done without the knowledge or consent of many people. So back then, it is said that they started targeting the floating voters, like because in any elections, you have voters who are pretty much decided. They know who they want to vote for, they know what their stance is regarding the different issues. And then you have floating voters, people who are not really sure, people who are still making up their mind, right? So this is what happened back then, the Cambridge Analytica scandal, which was a reflection of how the information ecosystem, whether it's accurate information, misinformation, or disinformation, can have real life impact on elections, on referendums, and so on. Moving to the year 2020, we see, as I was telling you a while ago, an event like COVID-19, right? So normally in times of crises, people are very thirsty for information, right? So if you have a health crisis, you want to know more and you can easily panic, right? So if I tell you that, I don't know, this virus can be spread by touching, this virus can, whatever misinformation that was spread back then, people, because they're very scared, they're very worried, and they're thirsty for information, they easily believed and shared a lot of disinformation and misinformation regarding the virus, especially, for example, I don't know, in I think this was spread in different parts of the world that the big tech giants are trying to plant a chip in our bodies in order to manipulate us. I think this was an international thing, right? So a lot of conspiracy theories like that, a lot of misleading content like that, anti-vaccine campaigns informed the decisions of many people. The problem is many of these claims, many of these conspiracy theories were not backed by evidence, you know? So again, a very fertile disinformation, misinformation environment, right? Then moving to 2022, we started having, I can say, like a war that took media coverage, a big media coverage in 2022, the Russia-Ukraine war. And we started as well seeing a lot of disinformation, a lot of misinformation regarding what's happening on the ground. I don't know if you've heard this, but this was named the TikTok war. Have you heard this term before? Right? So Russia-Ukraine war was referred to as the TikTok war because TikTok was used as an alternative medium in order to kind of represent or disseminate what's happening on the ground. And then, of course, moving to 2023, we've seen the war on Gaza, right? With a lot of disinformation, a lot of misleading content regarding what's happening there that was debunked, some of which was debunked by the professional media and some remains as is or impacting how people think about different things. And of course, as you see, the timeline continues. So these are different milestones that happened over time and that reflect how this media environment, this information ecosystem can have an impact on the ground, can have an impact on people's opinions, on their attitudes towards different issues. Right, so let's move to this part and try to zoom in on our media experience and how it's like. So let's see what happens when we're seeking information or when there is some sort of crisis that drives information thirst, right? I will try to address this point or this part through responding and reflecting on these three questions, right? First of all, what happens in the process? What is your bubble composed of? And how do you process such content? So what happens in the process of searching for information or exposure to media content? This is a very important thing that happens in the digital media environment, the data collection and privacy invasion, right? So our data is continuously being collected, right? To an extent that we're not necessarily aware about all the time, right? Such data, as we've mentioned a while ago, are fed to algorithms which decide what to include and what to remove from our bubble. Are you familiar with the term filter bubble? Yes or no? Yeah? So a filter bubble is a term that was coined many years ago, right, to try to describe what happens as a result of the personalization algorithms that are used on the different platforms, right? So because my experience is very much personalized, it's like I become inside a bubble, and it's called filter bubble because many of the content that's not appealing to me, that's not relevant to my preferences and my interests, gets filtered out, right? So this is what we mean by the word bubble in this context, right? So in the case of the different digital platforms we deal with, it's not a human that decides what gets in and what gets out. It's an algorithm, right? So the machine categorizes me, right? It judges me according to the data it collects and decides what I like and what I don't like. Is everybody aware about it, especially younger generation? This is a very important question. Do we know what kind of data are collected and for what purposes? And how does this affect our media experience and our exposure or lack of exposure to certain information? And here it's important to remember that there is information we want to know and information we need to know, right? So basically, the algorithms caters to what we want to know, what we like, what entertains us, what we're interested in. But maybe it filters out information that we need to know, that would complete a certain picture about a certain issue in our mind. So many, of course, especially younger generations, depend on the personalized media for information and news, right? And here we see algorithms taking decisions for us, as we've said, right? The question again rises here: are algorithms working for our interest, or are they providing the aspired personalized experience? So I will invite you to take a look at this quote and reflect on it a little bit. So it says that algorithms are regulating visibility on social media, but their settings are biased because they always adhere to the logic of the market rather than the ethical standards. This rapid production of content is impossible to control or censor in real time, and legal regulations are usually applied post festum or after a cybercrime has already been committed. So what do you think? What do you understand from this post, from this quote? Sorry.
Sorry, I think like most of what we are consuming as, consumers of data or everything that is, being pushed down to consumers at this point, one way or another, we are like part of that whole process of like equally being culprit on the whole sense. But this particular statement, what I do see is like the whole logic behind the way the data or the information is created is catered with the intent to promote a specific thing. And these are like the market forces. And in the process of, you know, those information when they are disseminated, whether in the form of an advertisement or through, an information putting it across in a certain way, they're not really evaluated from an ethical standpoint. So there's this sort of the moral compass, so to say, is sort of not there with in order for it to kind of really exist in order before, so that so the whole idea of morality in that sense has no relevance per se, but it's more like, you like a specific thing, you create more content because consumers are enjoying it, and you create more and more on the series and sequence of it, and then end consumer tends to take all of that information just because they started to enjoy it a lot more, and then it becomes like a bubble in that
Yeah.
sense. So like there's no concept of morality anymore than there.
Yeah, thank you very much, Stephen, for this reflection, which is absolutely correct, right? This code is trying to shed light on this idea that there is a lack of alignment between the platform's benefits, how their business model works, right? And the user's interests or the user's well-being, right? It kind of gives priority to this market benefit at the expense of ethics, sometimes at the expense of what people would really benefit from, what people's well-being is requiring one way or another, right? So this is very important to let sink in and think about a little bit, right? Which takes us to this very important concept of attention economy. I don't know if you've heard about it, right? So this term was coined by a Nobel laureate, right, Herbert Simon, who used the word to describe the fact that, as you know, economy refers to scarce resources, more or less, that we have and how we can make best use of these resources. So if we're talking about attention economy, we are addressing our attention as a scarce resource. This means that I cannot give my attention to everything, and there is some sort of a fight or some sort of a challenge, a competition between the different platforms to try to maintain our attention for the longest period of time, right? So their business model is based on capturing our attention for the longest period. And this happens through, one way to do it is by hyper-personalizing our experience. So if I'm logging into my social media account and I'm seeing content that I like, I'm most likely going to spend much more time than if I'm seeing content, a diversity of content, some I like and some I don't, right? So this is very important to bear in mind, the attention economy, right? And then there is this very interesting quote that a wealth of information creates a poverty of attention. So imagine that you're thirsty, right? You want to drink. And instead, this is a very popular analogy, right? Instead of giving you a bottle of water or a cup of water, I brought, the fire hose and I just started spraying in your face, right? So this is what happens with the information environment. It's a lot of information. We're overwhelmed by this overload of information. We have the illusion that we know, but realistically, our attention is very much distracted, right? It's scattered with all the load of overwhelming information we're receiving all the time, right? So this takes us to the second part, navigating to the information environment in the age of information warfare and algorithmic gatekeeping. And here I will invite you to think a little bit about how the social media works and that they are very complex systems, right? Narayanan actually provided this very interesting explanation regarding how the system works by telling us that it works from the interplay between these two components, the platform design and the human behavior. And this reflects what you were saying a while ago, Stephen, regarding how we as humans or as consumers and creators of content contribute to these systems. So on the side of the platform design, as we have been talking, we have the algorithms. And of course, there are many different types of algorithms. That's, I think, a topic for another session, right? And we have the policies, the laws that govern the different platforms. And we have the UX and the UI design. I don't know if you're familiar with these terms. Do you know what UI and UX is, right? So the UX is basically the journey of the user on the platform and how this journey is designed, right? How you navigate from one point to another, and the UI is the interface, the user interface, or how far the platform looks appealing to users. So every decision that is made on the side of the platform design, whether it's the type of algorithms, the policies, the UI or the UX, is intentional to serve, to create an environment that is appealing to the users and to serve the interest of the platform. Unfortunately, until this point, it's very rare that we find a platform that takes the user well-being into account as much as it takes the benefit of the platform into account, right? So this is very important to have present. Also, the human behavior, how far the users of these platforms are aware about how these complex systems work. This affects big time the type of type of content we consume and the type of content we create, right? Very simple example. Do we share content before verifying or we have to verify first? Are we aware that we are creating a bubble by consuming certain content or not? Do we think about what message we're getting across to different people when we're creating content or not, right? So all this affects how these systems work, right? So this takes me to this concept of information warfare. So when I say information warfare, what do you understand from this term? Any reflections? Would anybody like to share any thoughts about it?
Like, so I
So,
feel like
well,
it's more of a psychological warfare nowadays, with so much of the dearth of information. Like you mentioned about the water, if you ask for a glass of water and the information, like you're giving the water hose. It's something very much like that. Like, and it's like, how do you filter out from so much of consumption? One of the other things is like the lack of, like, when like in the education space, when especially the younger age group, from 0 to 3, I was reading a report and I saw that 80% of the right brain is developed of a child within the first 3 years. And at this point in time, when the screen is one of the prominent sort of consumption for younger kids nowadays, and parents when they're kind of giving it up, I feel like the brain, when you take it away from them, there is a certain attitude shift in the way the development of a brain should be. When this kind of sort of consumption of, like, in the past, like it was to basically complement and support, but whereas it has other psychological disturbances and disorders and so on. I think this is like more of like, other than from a weaponized sort of wars, it's more like an information. And some nowadays even wars are being fought on the basis of technology, spam calls, technology, like data fraud, this and that. Like, so there's like too much going on in one way or another. That's what I think. And sorry,
absolutely. Absolutely.
I do not intend to sort of jump on each of this, but I just sort of say.
No. Thank you very much. No, I really appreciate you sharing your thoughts. Thank you very much, Stephen. Georgie, you unmute. Would you like to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that probably it's better to say that our everyday life basically is this war with the information, because it's like everywhere, and no matter what we do, no matter what our jobs are, no matter how many people we have in our family or stuff like that, it's always connected with the information. And of course, nowadays, not all of it, let's say, like, truthworthy, or let's say like just in general true or something like that. And it's very difficult to escape it. So I think this is probably the war that we have right here, right now, with ourselves every day. It's not about, like, it's not only about, like, international wars and like fighting between countries or between people, but it's just like fighting, like it's a fight between us and the information in general.
This is a very interesting perspective. Like you took this concept to a different personal level, right? Like how you want to say the struggle we have in order to differentiate like credible information, what we do with it, and so on. But this is very
Yeah.
interesting. It's an interesting layer to reflect on regarding the information warfare, especially that normally this term is used to refer to the idea of weaponizing information, right? And I think, I don't know, I don't want to say this is more dangerous than real weapons, but this is hugely dangerous, right? Like if I'm using information as weapons, have a very prominent example in recent history. For instance, the weapons of mass destruction and Iraq. I don't know if you know about how this whole thing unfolded, right? When the US said that Iraq has weapons of mass destruction, right? And they actually used a big media mogul like Rupert Murdoch, who owns a lot of the media machine in the world, And they started disseminating information and stories about the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And this was all paving the way for the US in order to invade Iraq. Later on, many years later, they revealed that there were no weapons of mass destruction. So this is a very interesting example in how information can be weaponized, right? And this is normally how information warfare works. Well, is this new, the idea of weaponizing information and using it for certain purpose? This is definitely not new, right? Like this has been existent since the existence of humanity, right? However, nowadays, this age of information warfare is different for many factors. Extensive use of the internet and digital technology in order to manipulate, disseminate, and weaponize information. And this is normally done for political, social, or economic interest. And because of this digital technology, there is rapid dissemination of this information. So this information just spreads very rapidly, right? There is anonymity. You never really know who's behind it, right? So it becomes very complicated to trace the original source of this, right? There is amplification of effect. So if it spreads very widely, then the effect is amplified, right? And of course, there's the use of advanced technology to mislead and shape the public perception, shape their attitudes, shape their opinions regarding different issues. And definitely social media plays a crucial role in that, right? So again, why is this era different? As we have been saying, digital transformation, there's an S missing here, excuse me for that. So digital transformation, we have moved from an oligopoly, limited number of sources, to innumerable information sources. So we have abundance of information. We have AI, which plays a double-edged role, right? So with all the benefits we are seeing of AI, it's one of the main tools that are used for disinformation and misinformation. It's one of the tools that are used to create what is known as content farms. I don't know if you've heard this term before or not, but content farms are different websites or different parts on the internet that publish low quality content with very large quantities in order to drive traffic, to make money, to disseminate a certain agenda, and so on. And the majority of content farms are AI generated, right? So we have the idea of amplification and virality, the wide and quick spread that is difficult to control the damage. So if misinformation spreads about something, it just like fire in the wild, right? It goes very quickly, very rapidly, it goes viral. And as we said, anonymity and camouflage, we have a lot of false identities, bots, and trolls that spread disinformation. So we also have automated content moderation. I don't want to sound repetitive, but this is what we've been talking about regarding algorithmic gatekeeping. We have selective manipulation because data is being collected about us. So I can decide, each one of us has a profile in the cloud, right? Depending on the data they collect about us. So I can very easily decide that I want to target, I don't know, females aged 18 to 30 who live in a certain area, right? So you can do this selective manipulation depending on certain demographic group to do certain purposes, right? Can be used in marketing, for marketing purposes, for brands and so on, but it can also be used for political purposes to manipulate people's opinions regarding different matters, right? We have less trust in journalism, and we have a geopolitical importance of information, right? So using information and disinformation as a tool to reach certain geopolitical objective, as we're seeing with the different wars that are happening in the world right now. So this is the longest answer to one question, right? So this was the first question. How do we navigate what happens when we're seeking different information? The second question is, what is your bubble composed of? And I don't want to be pessimistic in this session, okay? We're trying to shed, of course, there are a lot of great things in the current digital media environment, but what we're trying to do is shed light on the risks and challenges in order to know how to protect ourselves and empower younger generations to be protected from such risks and challenges, right? So what is your bubble composed of in addition to the great things we have? We have recent examples to consider, right? So a study that was done in 2021 found that YouTube recommends content that violates its own policy, right? So it includes content that carries misinformation, that carries violent content, hate speech, spam, and deceptive practices, despite the fact that in the policies of YouTube, this is not allowed. Yet, their recommendation algorithm recommends content that violates this policy. Another study found that 70% of content watched on YouTube is based on recommendations rather than user searches, right? So I think this complements what we were just talking about. It's not just about what you search for, but it's also about how the algorithm decides to recommend a certain content. I don't know if it happened with you, but sometimes you just find content that is different from your preferences, different from you being recommended to you on TikTok or on YouTube, right? And actually, studies found that as a result of that, users of YouTube risk getting stuck in an ideological bubble, right? And this takes us to a very important finding regarding YouTube, because I think different studies have shown that it's one of the platforms that are used to recruit people to different terrorist organizations as a result of the different recommendations that emerge from its algorithm, and you just get stuck in this bubble and you cannot escape it. So for instance, if you're searching for the flat earth theory, you just get tons and tons of information recommended on regarding the flat earth. Or if you're not searching about it and it emerged and you decided to engage, you get stuck in this bubble, right? In 2023, The Guardian, actually one of the newspapers that are very well known for their investigative journalism, have done this investigative report on a group that sells hacking services and access to a vast army of fake social media profiles, right? Back then, I don't know if you've heard about this from the news, but it was known in the media as Team Jorge, right? So Team Jorge is an Israeli hacking unit that has a huge army of bots that is automated fake social media profiles, right? And they use these bots to meddle with different elections. The Guardian actually found that this group was involved in 33 presidential elections around the world, right? They target different floating voters through disinformation campaigns, through different fake accounts in order to try to manipulate them into a certain direction. According to the EU Disinformation Lab, algorithms that are not designed to have quality information in their objective functions will naturally favor disinformation. This is again a very important statement, right? So if the algorithm, the developers of the algorithms do not have this present, that the algorithm need to favor quality information, automatically the algorithm naturally favors this information as something that is more attention grabbing, that is more insightful to people's emotion, right? And then this is another study that has shown that fiction can outperform reality as a result of YouTube recommendation. As you see, this is the percentage of result in favor of the flat earth theory according to YouTube recommendations. It's the highest percentage, and same applies for people who believe, or this idea that global warming is a hoax, right? You can see that the fiction, the misleading results through the YouTube recommendation algorithm are with great percentage. Of course, you also have dangerous TikTok challenges for engagement, right? Serving the attention economy. So this was very much prominent, especially when TikTok first started spreading the different challenges and so on. The blackout challenge, the skull breaker challenge. I don't know if you've come across any of these, but these were challenges to kind of push people to engage and to favor the attention economy at the expense of their own well-being. We also have NewsGuard, right? This is a website that tracks disinformation, that tells us that there are different war disinformation campaigns that are actually, they found, and of course this number has changed because this slide is not done recently, right? So NewsGuard at the time has identified 331 Russia-Ukraine disinformation site and is tracking the top false narratives that they are publishing about the war in Ukraine. You also have a study by the Guardian that has shown that after spending 45 minutes on TikTok, right, the majority of users started being exposed to different content, many of which included disinformation and reliable sources. So it was a mix of disinformation and credible sources without flagging the disinformation part, right? So this is basically examples that show us what our bubble can be composed of because of the hyper-personalization and the factors we explained at the very beginning. So what are the consequences? How do we process this content and what kind of impact does this have on users? You have, of course, this list is not exhaustive, right? You have a lot of consequences. However, the most prominent of which are confirmation of different realities. So once again, if I compare my social media feed to any of yours, would have different realities, different type of content, despite the fact that we might be looking for the same thing. However, we can have different ideas because of the hyper personalization. As a result of which we have polarization. So since 2016, it has been noted that polarization has increased in different societies around the world through reinforcing cognitive biases. This applies to the idea of echo chambers, right? So if I have an echo chamber, I'm hearing my voice over and over again, I'm getting emphasis on my beliefs. I'm less likely to be tolerant to what others believe about the same thing. We also have a consequence of information chaos, where we have a mix of facts and disinformation and misinformation all in one place. And we stop here because the definition of truth and fact can differ from one person to another. So what I find or what I define as true or factual can be very much false for you, right? And of course, we have weaponizing information or information wars with misleading frames emerging from different parts of the world to kind of serve the interests of those who disseminate them. So how does this affect us? Sorry. How does this affect us? Of course, we have increasing cognitive biases. We are less likely to question what we're seeing because, again, we're getting confirmation all the time. We're comfortable in our own bubble that is very much personalized and so on. We are more intolerant towards difference, right? So if I'm getting emphasis on my perspective all the time, I'm very much not likely to grasp other perspectives that are different or that are contradictory from mine. And I don't have the tolerance to even listen, right? So this is a very important consequence that affects global understanding in general, right? I have, of course, I can be misled and misguided in my decision-making process as a result of this information environment if I'm not aware. So how can these challenges be addressed? I will stop here for a while to ask you if, like, I feel like you guys are exhausted. It's a bit heavy, right? So I want to ask you if you have any commentary before we move to the last part of the session today. So we have been reflecting on the current media environment, the factors that define it, different concepts that we should be aware of, and what kind of risks and challenges are there. Do you have any questions or any reflections that you would like to share so far?
Just a philosophical one, actually. There was
Please.
a sentence on your slide about the lack of I don't remember the exact wording, but like the connection between the platform and the consumers, what they really want. Do you think there will ever be such kind of a connection? Like not the lack of that, but like, you know, that the platforms will actually do something for the audience. It feels like they'll only do things for like, you know, for business, for profits and stuff like that.
Well, do you want the ideal optimistic answer or the realistic one?
Of course, the realistic one.
Because, well, from what we're seeing until this point, it's not very promising, you know. However, with like if it's left for the platforms themselves, they want to serve their economic agenda at the end of the day, right? So they want to make money. And unfortunately, their business model is built around our excessive consumption, our attention for the longest period of time. And this does not align with our well-being, right? However, it aligns perfectly with their interests. So I think maybe with the efforts that people like you guys are doing, or like the Gabinete are doing, for instance, right? Collective efforts like this are trying to push for a change, right? Are trying to push for more ethical designs. Because are there options? Yes, there are options, right? They can still make money. However, maybe it will be not as easy as it is now, right? However, they can still make money using ethical designs, using raising the user's awareness about what algorithms are used, how they affect their media consumption, or how this affects. Take an example. If you're scrolling on some platforms, after some time, it gives you this notice that you've been here for an hour, right? So it tries to draw your attention that you need to stop now. You've spent too much time. But do you stop
Of course not.
if you get this notice, right? Because it's too addictive, right? And actually, some studies have shown that using digital media or social media for long periods of time activates the same areas in the brain as if you're using some sort of a drug, right? So it is addictive. And this is because of how they design it. I'm usually, and I'm a very optimistic person, so I will choose to believe that with the groups who are pressuring for this to change, maybe we'll see this change at some point in time, especially, or the other way around, if they haven't changed, then you want to raise awareness of the people in order to minimize the harm and in order to create a bigger lobby for this movement to have a real life impact, right? And this is the part that we're talking about right now. How can we address these challenges? You've been reading in this module about media education and media literacy, and this is actually a very important tool in order to try to raise awareness, or in order to try to bring attention of the different stakeholders, because it's not just the users, right? So the different stakeholders regarding how serious this issue is. So media and information literacy for a safe and responsible media experience. I will take you through an explanation of how we can approach understanding what media and information literacy is. I know you've been reading about it for some time, but maybe this will provide you with a different perspective. If I want to understand what is literacy in general, the word literacy in general is the ability to read and write, right? So if I want to apply this to media and information, then in this context, the term literacy will be used with this inference that the media, information, and the news content are never fully obvious, and that they require certain knowledge or certain skills in order to be able to read them, to understand them, and to create or to write your own content in a conscious and responsible manner. It's a multi-dimensional construct, right? We cannot address media information literacy as a very simple concept. No, it includes a lot of layers in it. So one way to understand it is through mixing these two very important sides, these two very important dimensions. if I want to be media literate, it's very important to have some basic competencies and to have some basic knowledge areas as well. So if we're speaking about competencies, access, what is the competency of access? So access here has two levels. The first level is the physical access, to actually have access to the internet, to actually have access to the information ecosystem that everybody else is on, and so on. But there is also the cognitive access. Many of us, when we're using the digital media platforms, we're using it in an automatic mode. You're not really present. You're not really thinking about what you're consuming. You're not really considering how this content you're consuming affects your thoughts, how it affects your opinions, and so on. So this is one of the things we mean by access, cognitive access, to be present, to be aware when you're using the different media or the different information. The second very important competency is your ability to analyze, to deconstruct, to break down the content you have in front of you. So if we want to deal with the different media texts as, do you know a Lego? Do you guys use Lego? Have you ever used Lego to build anything? Right? So when you're building Lego, there are a lot of tiny pieces inside, right? But these tiny pieces are very important to shape the final thing you see, the final figure, the final house, the final plane, the final motorbike, right? So you can deal with the media the same kind of, this is an analogy to kind of make it understandable. So the media is also built, it's constructed. The different content we see is always constructed. So your ability to analyze is your ability to deconstruct it, to see beyond the obvious messages you have in front of you, whether it's text, whether it's picture, whether it's a video, right? Your ability to question and to deconstruct and to analyze the content you see. And then this will take us to the third competency, which is to evaluate, right? To evaluate here refers to my ability to judge whether this is credible or not, whether this is positive or not, whether this is harmful or not, what kind of impact would this content have, right? And this must happen as a result of my ability to analyze, right? And finally, of course, the ability to communicate in a safe and in a responsible manner. A very simple example is not to share before verifying the information, right? Because when you're sharing, you're communicating, right? And if you're sharing false content that triggers certain emotions, then you're contributing to the problem, right? So it's very important to have the skill to communicate responsibly. And then we have the different knowledge areas, right? The knowledge of media content, the understanding that this content is shaped in a certain way. What kind of formats am I seeing in front of me? What kind of impact would the photo have? What kind of impact would the video have versus the impact of the text? So understanding the content and how it's shaped. The knowledge of the media industry, what we've been talking about a while ago, understanding the business models of the media industry, the different media players, understanding how ownership affects the different decisions, right? Who owns this? What kind of agenda, what kind of editorial line are they following? This is very important. Knowledge of the media effects, so understanding and raising awareness or being knowledgeable about the different effects that the media can create, right? And we've seen this if you've studied media as an undergraduate, as some of you have, you'd see this in the different communication theories, such as the cultivation theory. This is one of the effects of the media. The agenda setting theory, this is another effect, and so on. Knowledge of the real world, this refers to this understanding that the media text is constructed. It's never a mirror. So the media, whatever you see in the media is not a mere reflection of what's really happening. It's always constructed by someone. So this concept is very important to understand. And of course, the knowledge of the self. And this has to do with what Potter referred to as the locus of control. How far you see yourself as in control of your media consumption habits, of your exposure to different content. So for instance, I would ask you this question. On a Likert scale from 1 to 5, how far do you agree with this statement? If I'm misinformed, it is my responsibility to find the truth. How far do you agree? I will repeat the statement. If I'm misinformed, it is my responsibility to find the truth.
I mean, if it's your
From
responsibility
on
is
a scale from 1 to 5.
on a scale of 1 to 5, 5.
With 1 being not responsible, with 5 being extremely, it's my responsibility.
Or from scale of 1 to 5, I would keep it 2.5.
5.
2.5, yeah. And the reason for that is,
2.5, okay.
yeah, like somewhere in between.
Okay, why?
So the reason why I feel is like whether it's your responsibility, the answer is if only you feel you're responsible for, moving to that direction to educate and yourself. So it gets to a point where the information was something that you were really seeking. And if you were seeking, you will find a solution and an answer for it, like to make sure that you're correct. But whether or not it is relevant for you and it does not impact your life in any other way, so it's just like a stated fact, and it'll be like somewhere in between. And that's why I'm saying 2.5 based on that question
All
you said.
right.
I mean, that's just like my
All right.
logical sort of thinking on that.
Okay. So this reflects, your answer reflects how far you think you should be in control of your media environment. Because in this idea, some people would say, no, it's definitely the responsibility of the media to tell me what's true and what's not, right? And then others would say, no, it's absolutely my responsibility. And then some would fall in the middle, right? So perhaps in the old times, in when it was just the traditional media, before all the digital media, before all this wide dissemination and quick dissemination of information, perhaps back then the responsibility fell more on the professional media or the professional organization to tell me what's wrong, what's true and what's not. But with the digital media, we as users were given power, right? So do you know the saying with create, this was the Spider-Man movie thing,
Yeah,
right? With
greater
great power comes
responsibility.
great responsibility, right?
Yeah,
So this applies pretty much here because we are empowered, we can have our voice, but with this also comes the responsibility that I should take charge of this. I should be responsible to seek the truth because I should be aware regarding how this environment works and so on, right? But thank you
yeah.
very much, Stephen, for sharing this.
Sally, I
Anybody
wanted
would
to
like to say
quickly
anything about that?
share, sorry.
Sure.
Sally, I wanted to
Go
share
ahead.
something, what's going on in Canada right now. It might be of some like of relevance to our discussion today. So, like the Prime Minister of Canada uh, recently called for elections, early elections now. There was at one point Trudeau, who was the Prime Minister, resigned, and a new Prime Minister has taken over. And there's an ongoing sort of conflict with the US at this point on policies and so on. And one of the podcasts earlier this morning I was listening to was on how like the media with Meta, there's this bill that was introduced by the government, which is called Bill C-18. And that bill basically forced organizations like Meta, Google, and others who to digital media companies to make sure that they pay to news agencies and organization for when they are creating their content, they should also be distributed and given some money. Now, in order of all of this, what Meta has done is they've blocked all their contents now. So even when the media companies are creating their contents and publishing it on Instagram or on YouTube and other places, now it will not you not be able to view it inside Canada. So you need a VPN or
But
something in order to.
this has been going on for some years now, no? For a couple of years or something. Or no?
It actually started last year, but now it's like it's there now. And the
Yeah.
similar, so it's basically now what the news agencies and the research suggests is like there's a daily view of 11 million viewership on those digital media is now gone. Now, this will lead to like the problem that now arises is that when you are not able to get this information from the original or sort of credible sources, then people will rely on, digital content created by individuals, and which could lead to misinformation and things like that. Now, that's like the worry because the influence of this is leading into what's going on into elections next month, which is on April 28th. Now, the narratives are sort of set in a way wherein people will rely on non-credible sources versus like credible sources because they can't view. So it actually did unjust to what it was trying to do. But Meta, because they don't want to pay, they just blocked the whole thing altogether. So that's now influencing the results of what will happen in the elections and how people's temperament towards information will also be. So
I think
this
you
is
should
going
make a
on in Canada.
I think you should make a
Yeah.
study. You should develop a study, Stephen. No, seriously, I mean, this is a very interesting point in time to study how the people perceive this, whether they're aware about it to start with or not. Because
Mm,
if they're not aware about it, then they will definitely fall in this trap of seeking information from all the mix of credible and uncredible sources.
yeah.
Because on the other hand, if the majority of people are aware about it as you're saying it now, maybe this would be a shift in consumption and people would return to professional journalism, right? Traditional professional journalism, visiting websites of news organizations, for example, and so on. But this has to be given that they are aware regarding what happened. Do you think people in Canada are aware or not
So
really?
there is a lot of discussions and awareness around this now.
Okay.
And I think like whether the question is about whether the government was doing it consciously because their position at one point was like that they'll be out of government of power. But
Mhm.
now because of the stance that US has towards Canada, like people have like left their particular position about the government anymore. Like now they're like still going back to the idea whether they wanted the liberal party to come to form government because they can be a good opposition to the conservative views of the US. So it
Yeah.
actually favored them with all these stances and move. And whatever the
Mhm.
idea was at one point is now turning out to be in favor for them. And people in Canada generally are very research oriented, sort of academic in that's an approach. So I'm
Yeah.
sure what you were saying and suggesting will eventually be the outcome where people will rely to, going back to maybe I mean, to their apps or subscribing to the newspapers or things like that. But the consumption time Visa versus like Instagram versus an app of any XYZ will always be like sort of, that will be always outnumbered. And this is
Yeah,
where
and
people will have to focus from their current shift of interest to other shift. That's what I feel. Sorry.
I think it's a golden moment to try to make a movement and to situate the platforms for their correct use, like
Mm,
maybe you can seek some information, you can shop, you can like create a shift in consumption, right? It can be a complementary source of information, but never a main source of information.
right.
um Perhaps you can do something about it, Stephen. I think it's a very interesting moment to consider, to create a lot of studies, to create a lot of movements of awareness and so on. Why not? You should consider it,
Sure,
I think.
Sally. I'll take your advice and I'll probably touch base with you on this and see what we can do. Yeah,
Sure, sure.
what I can. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing this. Thank you. All right, so back to that. That's a question here. So now we understand that media literacy or media and information literacy is multidimensional. It includes competencies, it includes knowledge areas. And then there is this question, right? Does media and information literacy protect or empower or both, right? So when media and information literacy or media literacy first emerged, it emerged with the intention to protect, right? Given that back then, especially with the Granville Declaration, it's a very important, I don't know if you've read about it, the Granville Declaration that took place regarding media and education, right? Back then, they were very concerned about the negative impact of media on vulnerable audiences, young children, teenagers, and so on. So media literacy back then emerged in the paradigm of protection. But later on, as things advanced in the digital media environment, it also continued with protection, but also empowerment, right? So media literacy can both protect and empower, right? So we have the protectionist paradigm that places emphasis on shielding audiences against potential harmful impact of media messages, such as children or younger audiences and so on. And we also have the empowerment paradigm, which focuses on the role of media literacy in order to empower citizens to become critical towards power structures, and accordingly, the power that citizens are given in that sense to have an impact. And this is what we're talking about, Stephen, right? So the kind of impact you can have on politics, on the society, on institutions, and so on, media and information literacy can empower in that sense, right? Including, of course, components of analysis, assessment, and evaluation of different media messages as core pillars, right? So this is very old, because I think now a lot of other things should be included in this chart. It just tries to raise to bring to your attention that media and information literacy include different kinds of literacies, such as news literacy, focusing on understanding news content, cinema literacy, right? Advertising literacy, digital literacy. These are all components that fall under the umbrella of media and information literacy. And then nowadays, of course, this takes us to a very important concept of AI literacy, right? So how is this related to media literacy? Well, I think you have the answer now, that AI and automated algorithms are part and of the pack and parcel of the media environment we're dealing with, right? So I think that AI literacy is a very important concept to become integrated under the umbrella of media and information literacy. So AI literacy refers to a person's ability to understand and interact confidently with AI-based systems, which are the systems we are dealing with every day, whether we realize it or not. Right, so momentum to MIL and AI literacy, right? This should result or should develop as follows. First of all, taking control of one's daily media experience and becoming conscious, right? I have to ask myself these questions. What media do I use? Which platforms do I spend most time on? What am I feeding my brain through the content I'm exposed to? Raising awareness about the black box. I don't know if you know this book by Frank Pasquale. He's a very well-known author in the field of understanding robotics and understanding social media systems and so on. So he coined this term, the black box, right? Referring to the hidden sides of the social media platforms that we know nothing about. So it's very important to have the ability to analyze platform and ask questions like, what is an algorithm and how does it work? How is content moderated on different platforms? This is very important, especially that recently, with the recent US elections, I don't know if you've heard about Meta's change in policy regarding the content moderation. I highly recommend that you check this out if you haven't, because it's very controversial, right? How is the platform designed and with what purpose? How does the platform gain money? Who designed the algorithms used? And what biases are demonstrated or are potentially there? Last but definitely not least, it's very important to think about equipping with skills. How can I trick my algorithm, right? So there was this young man who has done this experiment. He created 2 different identities on the social media with 2 different profiles, and he really changed the type of content. It's like he created 2 different characters himself, right? In order to try to compare the information environment here and the information environment there. This is also very interesting. How can I see the content that is not in my filter bubble? What are the different types of harmful content and how can I detect them? So this eventually, and this Georgie here, this is me being optimistic, right? So this should help raise awareness, should help motivate cognitive access, should boost people's critical thinking skills, and eventually lead to a more responsible media experience. I will end by sharing with you some good practices. There is this very interesting project by Digital 2030 and the Canadian Commission for UNESCO. I don't know, Stephen, if you've heard about it. It's called the Algorithm and Data Literacy Project. It's basically a project that is targeted to kids to make them understand how the algorithms in the platforms they use work. So this is one of the very good initiatives. There is also this initiative by this person, Guillaume Chaslot, used to work in YouTube, and then he decided to revolt and to create this algo transparency initiative, right? It's targeted to the public to raise awareness regarding how the algorithms work, and to also to policymakers and platforms, inviting them to become more transparent regarding how their algorithms work. In that sense, and again, in response to Georgie's question regarding whether we should be optimistic about that, there should be action involving different stakeholders on 4 levels. So on the level of industry, right, or on the level of the platform, media and information literacy movements should try to emphasize on the importance of human vetting, right? It shouldn't all be 100% automated. Aligning interests with those of the users, right? And this is very important. Promoting algorithmic transparency, promoting humane design instead of addictive design of platform. And again, this is a question of the UI and UX here. I highly recommend that you check out something called dark patterns. Dark patterns. Dark patterns refers to tricks in the UX design that are basically done to manipulate users into certain type of use or certain navigation process. It's very interesting to reflect on them as well. And of course, inviting them to reconsider their business model. This is on the first level. On the second level, involving a very important stakeholder, which is the civil society and citizens, it's very important to promote MIL and AI and algorithmic literacy to raise awareness about the cost of free services that we're paying a lot of our data as a price, right? To encourage initiatives that serve the public good. On the level of academia, it's very important to extend research to reach a concrete conceptualization of what algorithmic and AI literacy is, to map and assess good practices, to collaborate with industry and other stakeholders for applied research. And of course, involving governments, policy and decision makers is very important. Actually, the Gabinete of the UAB has developed a very important MOOC with the UNESCO about MIL targeted to policymakers. I think this is a very important initiative to try to get decision makers on board, to try to push to drafting more laws for regulating automated content moderation, enhancing transparency, and so on, and to push funding for good practices. I know this has been very extensive. I hope I haven't bored you much, and I hope you found this discussion beneficial one way or another. And I wait for your questions or your comments.
Thank you very much. I have again, a kind of philosophical question maybe, but regarding the last slide in the government section. So what we've seen with the US now, you know, it's a very tricky thing to work with the government, I think, because for example, today you work with a very democratic government, you show those different things, like it's better to show, like, I don't know, some kind of a notification in your UI, right, to show the users that, hey, we use this or that, and then all of a sudden there is like Trump or some kind of a wealthy man who buys Twitter and everything stops. And this is also, I think, a kind of a tricky question and not even like question and tricky situation in general, to rely on the government in terms of like, protecting us from, deep fakes or fakes in general. And I don't know, maybe I actually don't know, maybe they should be like some kind of a cross-governmental thing, or like, like I don't know. I don't want to say like European Union or something, but like an international body that will not control, also not a good word, but somehow help countries, people understand what is going on, how they can help, and so on and so forth. Because I don't know, even like a small thing for people who watch like television, saying like some information comes from this source and this information comes from that source would be really, really helpful.
Absolutely. No, I totally agree with you. And this is why this is a very debatable issue you're raising here, right? Whether you should rely on the government or not, because if you think the other way, like not involving the government at all, not involving the policymakers, I think you'd have a very chaotic situation, you know? So I think
True.
striking a balance here is very important, right? So you have to be smart in how you approach the government and the policymakers, and still have this complemented by involving the civil society, for example, like involving NGOs and independent bodies, as you're saying. So for instance, we have launched a year ago, like the study for this has been going on for some time, but a year ago we have launched what is known as the International Media and Information Literacy Institute. And it has a representation from all continents of the world. Like you have a representation literally from each continent, to try to have this independent body for advocating for media literacy movements, for creating degrees, and so on. Such bodies, I think, are very important to try to I don't want to say watch over the government, but perhaps collaborate the best way possible in order to have the best results, and to kind of get your way through around the political agendas and so on. So I think it's a very debatable issue, but an extreme in both sides is not recommended. It's not recommended to solely depend on them. It's not recommended to ignore them 100%, you know? So striking the balance here is very important.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. Leo and
Thank you
My
both.
question.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, Stephen.
Sorry, I just wanted to like how when people evolve and grow over a period of time with all the consumption that they've been using and the profile that you were talking about, that there's a profile of you as an individual. I do agree with it. For example, like when I evaluate my own sort of practices and so on social media, the content that I get to see is pretty much of what I'm actually used to consuming for a period of time. But then I try to also reset my sort of filter settings, whatever, so that it refreshes the whole thing. And recently I came across like they've hidden it somewhere, so somewhere like now they've got that back. Like it never existed on Instagram probably, but now it does exist, wherein it cleans the entire data the way you were consuming. So it only showed you those stuff. But now that particular thing is kind of, you can erase and reset it. My question is like, how much of it can you really influence? Or like, and when the profile of an individual, a certain kind, is created in a certain way, how long uh, can this basically stay? And when people evolve and grow and change with time, does that also influences, or it just creates more data about an individual and puts them about how they are changing? Like, I'm just
That's a
like
very
not sure as to yeah.
no, that's a very critical question. I'm afraid that there is not a single answer to that, you know, because how
Mm,
much you can actually influence, you can control some of it, but definitely not all of it, you know? And I think the more aware you are about how this works, the more able you are to take control one way or another. But
mm,
still, there will always be this black box, this dark spot
mm,
that you cannot control, that you do not know how it actually works, you know?
right.
So I think at this point would be very satisfied to bring this to people's awareness, to bring to people's awareness the kind of challenges, the kind of consequences, especially the negative ones that can emerge as a result of not knowing at all. And that's it, you know, and you control what you can control. But there will always be this dark spot that is definitely out of your reach, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But you still, if you know, you can detect whatever is not
Right.
suitable, whatever is harmful, you know. So minimize
Yeah,
the impact it should have on you, you know.
absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, Sally. Yeah.
Welcome. Thank you, Stephen. Any further comments or questions? All right. Albert, I think I'm sorry if we
Yeah,
took
no, don't worry. I was just going to thank you, all of you, for your participation. Oh, yeah. I don't. Oh, yes, it does. Sorry, I was reading the comments on the chat. Okay, so yeah, I was just going to thank you, all of you, for your participation and your thoughts and all the debates. I think it was really interesting. And just to thank you to Sally for your time today. I don't know if
Thank you.
you want to ask anything else related to today's session or maybe to um the work you must deliver on Sunday or anything before we have to leave today. No? Okay, so then I think this is it for today. Again, thank you. And if nothing goes wrong, we'll see you next week. Thank you, Sally,
Thank you.
again.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Albert. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
Enjoy the
Thank you,
rest of your
Sally.
evening.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye bye,
Bye.
guys.
Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Take care. Have a good day.